Welcome to the Basic Income Show. I'm your host, Scott Santens. I'm here with my co-host, Josh Worth and Conrad Shaw. Every couple of weeks, we'll talk about all the latest developments in the world of universal basic income. So, let's get going. I think to start off this week, we want to cover the article in the New York Times that came out recently that's covered the baby's first years study. Conrad, do you want to talk a little bit about that while I get it all set up?
Mostly this is something that we talked about the last episode a couple weeks ago, the study itself, and bringing it back because I've been getting a lot of people sharing this well-written article in the New York Times that says, hey, look, basic income doesn't work because it didn't help kids at all with their studies, or it didn't help them with their educational growth or something. And it was this study, this sort of cherry picking, and Scott can correct me wherever I get it wrong, but cherry picking sort of like this weird metric to me, which is like a series of ways to study like babies from like 0 to 3 years old by like measuring brain waves and an encephalogram and like measuring all these odd things that you would measure to check like educational development, right? And from knowing and being on the show and hearing about it all the time and from seeing it myself, the impact on kids of basic income is one of the most profound things that we tend to see. And the impact on education and development and behavior and all sorts of things. And then here comes this study that like one thing it pointed out is like, oh, it looks like, the linguistic characteristics of a 1.5-year-old or something like that aren't better than the control group. It looks like basic income doesn't help educational development. And the New York Times is running with this.
Yeah.
And people put a lot of credibility into the New York Times, and this is bringing back my, like once every couple of years, I'm furious with the New York Times for using their credibility to completely mislead the public. And I tend to remind people in general, like, remember those decades when the New York Times was basically platforming fossil fuel industry narratives about, how climate change versus global warming and it's all natural and it's not really real, and like basically running as an ad campaign for fossil fuel and Exxon and stuff like that and Chevron. It's the same goddamn thing. They are a platform that runs on
Yeah.
advertising and
Like
revenue. And it just,
this really feels like that. Like, it's a good comparison to compare it to the fossil fuel industry because like even this article, and we'll cover it, it has like multiple quotes from like the Heritage Foundation and the American Enterprise Institute, both like really conservative think tanks funded by conservative billionaires who have no interest in having their taxes increase and have no interest in, reducing poverty and inequality, especially with cash. And so, of course, like you can smell the bias in this article. But like, yeah, just a little bit more about the experiment, because this is an experiment I was really excited about from the very beginning. And I still think it's a great experiment, but this is, they got pregnant mothers to sign up before their kids were born. And on birth, these kids started getting $333 per month. And that's interesting. And there's basically already all this positive data for kids, but like this experiment wanted to go like a level deeper and look for like, are there impacts on like brain development? Instead of just like, do kids do better? They wanted to see kind of physiological stuff. And,
and
it's interesting to look at that.
specifically in the first couple of years of a kid's life.
Right. And are you going to see that? And, in the first year, there was some interesting data that seemed to be pointing in that direction. And now a few years later, it just seems to not be showing that kind of deeper level kind of stuff. So yeah, it paints you the wrong picture. But yeah, there's a lot of context involved and so let's get into that. But first, I just want to cover, what is it that this New York Times article said?
And I
Okay.
just want to couch this with like a preface that this is a tactic that happens a lot in like basically anti-UBI, but sort of credible journalism about it is like find one data point or one spinnable thing in one study and ignore all of the other studies. So while they're pointing to this and be like, well, here, this is conclusive, they're very explicitly leaving out the 100 other pilots that measure different aspects of child development and all sorts of stuff.
Okay, so the headline is Study Might Undercut Idea That Cash Payments to Poor Families Help Child Development. And this is written by Jason Pearl. It starts with, if the government wants poor children to thrive, it should give their parents money. That simple idea has propelled an avid movement to send low-income families regular payments with no strings attached. Significant but indirect evidence has suggested that unconditional cash aid would help children flourish, but now a rigorous experiment in a more direct test found that years of monthly payments did nothing to boost children's well-being, that defied research predictions and could weaken the case for income guarantees. After 4 years of payments, children whose parents received $333 a month from the experiment fared no better than similar children without that help, the study found. They were no more likely to develop language skills, avoid behavioral problems, or developmental delays, demonstrate executive function, or exhibit brain activity associated with cognitive development. And then it quotes Greg J. Duncan, an economist at the University of California, one of 6 researchers who led the study, said, "I was very surprised. We were all very surprised. The money did not make a difference." The findings could weaken the case for turning the child tax credit into an income guarantee, as the Democrats did briefly 4 years ago in a pandemic-era effort to fight child poverty. So
yeah, just to pause right there, it's like and I think they mentioned it a little in the next paragraph, but like as an aside, like it doesn't matter. Child poverty dropped in half when
right,
during the CTC, and then it jumped right back up to where it was after. But I guess their encephalogram readings weren't at a certain
right.
point, so it didn't it it was not impactful.
Like, can you imagine that argument? I thought the same thing reading this, saying, what if they had said, sure, we dropped child poverty by 40%, but apparently it didn't have these other findings. Why are we thinking about reducing child poverty? Should we only reduce child poverty if like it has these brain impacts? And if not, clearly that's not a good idea. Like, it's really weird to kind of like use that to argue basically for child poverty. Like, there's no point in reducing it. It doesn't have these impacts. It's just weird.
It's also just kind of odd to me to choose to study like brainwave patterns of 2-year-olds, right? Like in my mind, whatever socioeconomic status you're in, your job, especially for the first few years of a kid's life, is to sort of shield them from awareness of this stuff. So the main metrics are like, are they fed enough? Are they feeling love in the home and things like that? I don't like choosing to study like what they
Well,
studied
We need to study their brain waves,
it's a
Conrad.
bit odd to me.
We need to hook up the electrodes before we really know if this is science. Right? It
well,
feels like
like
we need to study these poor little children and get them into the laboratory. Right?
we know that there's data, and it's been correlational up to now, showing that there does appear to be a difference in brain development according to like density of white matter, um, according to income. And it's like one of those graphs where like if you're in poverty, then if you're like below the poverty line, then the impact is quite large, and then as you get up out of the poverty line, then the impacts are smaller. So there does seem to be some correlation between this like brain matter development and parental income status. And I think that's interesting. Like, this is why that the experiment was even designed in the first place. Like, is it such a case that by withholding income and like raising kids in poverty, does that lead to like brain development changes that can even be permanent, like as adults? Like, are we effectively damaging kids' brains when they're in child poverty? I think it's an interesting thing to explore. So like, I support this experiment, but I think that we should not be drawing conclusions at this point, because like I think you're going to see more stuff, and we've seen this from other pilots, and then we'll cover that later, that you do start to see this like later on in life. So if you reduce child poverty, for someone's first 3 years, maybe you don't see something that first 3 years, but also maybe he will see it when they're in school, and so they're at 6 years old, and maybe you'll see it something else when they're like 12, or maybe you'll see something else when they're teenagers. Like, you don't really know, but we can look at this and try to see, and they are trying to do that in like this causal effect RCT that you can't get from just like correlational studies. So, that's interesting. Okay, so when it comes to the details, I think another important detail, and we've actually talked about this before in a previous episode, we dug into this baby's first year's experiment. So I also suggest you can go back to that. But so one of the things is, this was $333 per month per kid, and that was per family. So there was no such thing as, additional income. It wasn't per kid. There wasn't like per adult kind of stuff. This is $333 per month. So if you have, let's say, a parent had one of these kids and they're in this pilot, and they have, I don't know, like 3 other kids. So they've actually got 4 kids total, and they're getting an additional $333 per month for the entire family as a result of this pilot. Well, that's going to impact the findings of the pilot. You have to actually acknowledge that that's a very small amount, and it's going to mean less to like larger families. So that's one thing. And also, it started during COVID. Like, this is basically when this started. And so you had these like really strong impacts from COVID that in the study, the researchers talk about this. Like, this can overwhelm the findings if you have like severe impacts. $333 per month is not going to really do much, with like a tidal wave of impacts. And then after COVID, we had this high inflation. So $333 per month is going to be eaten away by that. Again, you have these impacts that are just really large compared to this small amount of income. And for those of us talking about basic income, we're talking about like a per kid payment, and we're talking about a per adult payment that's larger. So if they're saying that $330 per month for one kid in a family of 4 with 2 adults and 2 kids, we're talking about like a poverty level payment of, let's say, $1,300 per month per adult. So that's $2,600 per adult. And then you've got some, kid component that maybe it's, additional $500 per month per kid. So that's additional $1,000 for the household. So that's $3,600 per month total compared to 333. That's like 10 times the size.
That's for comparison for bootstraps. And like a lot of the pilots going on did, 500 per household per month. And for similar reasons, there's issues with that size and that fact that it goes strictly to the household instead of to individuals. But for comparison, for our bootstraps project back in 2017, we did $1,000 a month per adult and $333 a month per kid. So that same household of 4 with 2 kids was getting like $2,600 or $2,700 a month. And so that's like an order of magnitude difference in terms of buying power. And you like at what levels of survival income, disposable income, or whatever should you hope to expect impacts on something like as subtle as brain development?
Yeah. So I've highlighted one of the quotes that's like, it's the fact that they even included this says a lot. Quote, "It shows that money alone won't lead to better outcomes for children," said Robert Dorr, president of the Conservative American Enterprise Institute, who supports imposing work rules on aid on the theory that working parents offer children role models. So this person believes in work requirements and is against anything that doesn't have those work requirements. And they're even, for imposing work requirements on Medicaid and on food stamps. Like, they believe that there's essentially no good comes from providing any kind of poverty relief. What you have to do is force parents to earn an income. And that's where good impacts come from.
And it's like the bias is like so apparent in the fact that they reached out to the American Enterprise Institute and like the Heritage Foundation, and they didn't include or reach out to the people like that have been involved in the other 100 experiments in the same, not just in UBI, but in terms of the same outcomes and impacts.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know, American Enterprise Institute, are they a pretty right wing? Are they like the Heritage Foundation?
Yeah.
Yeah, these are like very staunchly and well-funded advocacy groups against any sort of social support system.
To be fair, it is a hard thing for a reporter to
I like this part
report
too.
on. Like, what's that?
To report on what?
Just because they are, I mean, the statement was that this study is giving conservatives a talking point, an empirical talking point, which it is. But then the writer goes on to say, here is your empirical talking point. Like, it's a really like hard thing to report on, if to stay unbiased on, especially like in this climate. Like, I don't envy a reporter at all trying to like actually do real news at this point, because it's tough.
Yeah, you have to go.
Yeah.
You have to go a little more out of your way to try to like get contrasting opinions and see like where they're coming from and why. Like this
But yeah,
isn't.
I mean, this same writer I sent that link is wrote a contradictory article from the same study 2 years ago.
Yeah. Like here's a passage that I want to highlight too. Said, while researchers publicized the early, more promising results, the follow up study was released quietly and has received little attention. Several co authors declined to comment on the results, saying it was unclear whether payments had no effect and that the pattern could change as the children age. Like that paragraph to me shows bias because what they're saying is like, isn't it kind of interesting how, the study had positive results earlier and like everyone talked about them, but this is like a potentially a cover up involved. Like they're just not talking about the results of this, and the authors themselves don't want to talk about this. It's all hush hush. And even though the researchers say that, maybe more time is needed, like I think maybe they're just like hiding the study. Like that's what that paragraph says to me. And I really didn't like that particular,
Yeah.
part.
Then so eventually we'll go on and talk about like the contradictory data or like the mountains of data for the impacts on kids of basic income, specifically educational development. But I wanted to touch a little more on just like how odd it is it feels like the sorts of things we're choosing to study, like the implication of this CTC section where the CTC didn't improve brainwave or whatever, and that's like the measure of whether or not it was a success. It seems like it's like looking at people in sort of a brave new world sort of way, where it's like, did this uh intervention, did this program like fill the what is obviously the biggest need, which is to get everyone to function in exactly the way that we have set up for them in our minds? Like, did they all go into the roles and behave in the ways that we wanted them to do? Like good little cogs. It's like, were they happy? Who gives a shit? Were they more mentally secure? Who cares? Was the household more stable? Were they less hungry? You know, did they suffer? Who gives a shit? What were their brainwaves doing? Like it bothers me.
Yeah. And as if they actually care about that, like, so Robert Rector here, does he care about brainwaves? Like, here's the quote from him. I like how it says, it's an opponent of income guarantees at the Heritage Foundation. So, that's good. He praised the rigor of the study and said, quote, it blows the arguments for unconditional cash aid out of the water. The results are unsurprising, he said, because the safety net already provides what he called large food, healthcare, and wage subsidies, meaning few families face dire conditions, and the extra stipends did little to differentiate the groups. Like that, I think is particularly like ridiculous because basically they're saying that because Medicaid exists and because food stamps exist and like food banks and stuff, we're already helping all these kids in poverty. And so if we just give them an additional $333 per month, that's not going to make a difference because they're already getting so much help from SNAP and Medicaid and these things. And even like the earned income tax credit and stuff that really impacts kids. Like
Right.
that's funny to me.
And I mean, you can have this guy's quote in a journalistic piece, but then journalism says you go and see, like, does someone disagree with this and why? You don't just leave it there. This one person thinks this, period. Moving on. Like, it's, that's not journalism. That's basically, what did they call it when they were doing the stuff with Exxon and Chevron or whatever? Basically,
Merchants of Doubt, is that what it was?
there was like some sort of portmanteau for advertising and information, like advomation or something like that. Basically pamphlets for people to like be more okay with fossil fuels and burning and it's all good. Advotainment, or I don't know, it was something like that. And it's just
Yeah.
it's kind of like that. It's like, here is a balanced and well rigorously researched perspective, and people believe it. Like, I got this article from my dad, I got it from my team that's working on the documentary. They're like, what do you take of this? And it's like, I hate to like rag on journalists, but if they're not behaving like journalists, if they're behaving like basically well reputed lobbyists, that's a problem.
Yeah. And so this reporter too, it says at the bottom, he covers poverty in the U.S. So like, that's his beat, is covering poverty, but also it's for the New York Times. And as we know, the New York Times is certainly kind of behaving differently in the, Trump times. So it's not surprising to me to see something like this. I do like this quote from Michael Strain. Like, this is a fair quote. Michael Strain of the American Enterprise Institute, so again, conservative think tank, said the study reinforces doubts about cash aid, but he encouraged fellow conservatives not to make too much of it. Quote, it seems completely plausible to me that the pandemic overwhelmed an effect from the income. So that's what the researchers are saying. And so that's, it's an honest thing to say, like, look, I don't think this is going to work, but let's hold our roll on this because of, the circumstances of this. But it says, still, he noted that poor families face problems as varied as bad schools, violent neighborhoods, and a shortage of role models. Can $300 a month address that? I don't know why it would. And then here's how it ends. A single study may alter a few minds, but it has changed one expert's thinking. Mr. Duncan, a leading child poverty researcher, has been persuaded by studies of Medicaid, food stamps, and the Earned Income Tax Credit that unconditional cash aid would improve children's outcomes, but the uniform new results have made him reconsider. Quote, there is strong evidence that these other safety net programs reduce intergenerational poverty. Our cash payments appear unlikely to follow suit. We've got to come to grips with that. So that's the ending thought, is that we have to come to grips with the fact that cash isn't going to help anybody, and that really it's our existing safety net programs that are, the best for that.
Yeah, and one of the things that I haven't read them yet, but my partner Dea was reading this, and she was talking about how she went down into the comments and saw the result of the invitation that this sort of piece makes, which is it was sort of gross, like a lot of comments about well, yeah, see, the problem is it's in the culture, and those people don't, and these people, and whatever. It becomes this, it's just opening the door to welcoming your more elitist inclinations to blossom, it invalidating you are a better person than those people because you figured out life, and let's talk about what their problem is and how if you could just tell them how to live their lives, it would fix it, right? There's a lot of that going on in the comments, and that's what's so sad about it. Or that's one of the things. So let's do the second half of the journalism that this person should have done, and let's disabuse some people of some of their doubt.
Okay, so the first thing that I thought of when I think of this kind of child finding, I consider the gold standard of this is the work that Jane Costello has been doing, and this was a result of the Smoky Mountain Study of Youth that was started in the mid 90s, and it was meant to be a longitudinal study, which means they were studying the impacts of poverty on kids for 10 years was the plan. They were going to, just study kids for 10 years. You're growing up in poverty. And then a few years into the experiment, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians started providing, essentially it was a universal basic income. And a good percentage of the kids in that study, actually their families started getting that money. So it created this really interesting natural experiment to show what is the impact actually of cash on kids. And it followed them for decades. So we have actually decades of data of where are these kids at now, 30 years later. And so here's just a quick audio from Jane Costello herself talking about this. I feel it's kind of if we could get Jane Costello on the show, this is basically what she would say. So I really wanted us to listen to this.
Welcome to the Academic Minute. I'm Lynn Pascarella, president of Mount Holyoke College. In 1994, Native Americans opened a casino in North Carolina and decided to share profits directly with their members. Jane Costello, professor of medical psychology at Duke University, outlines this profit-sharing experiment and details the results.
20 years ago, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians opened a new casino in western North Carolina and made an interesting decision. The tribe decided to share profits directly with its members in cash payments of around $4,000 per person per year. My research team was already studying child mental health in this area, and we wondered how would the extra money influence the future of the children. We compared children's outcomes before and after the income supplements began. The study looked at physical and emotional health, education, and crime. Among the children whose families were already prosperous or who were desperately poor, we found little change. For some families, though, the cash supplements lifted them above the federal poverty line, and in those families we saw striking changes. 4 years before the supplement, these children had high levels of anxiety, depression, and conduct problems. 4 years later, these rates were dramatically lower. Now the children are into their 30s. Those who received the supplement were more likely to graduate from high school and had fewer teen pregnancies. They use less alcohol and fewer drugs and commit fewer minor crimes. We've tracked the cost of the supplement versus the savings on crime and medical care, and by age 26, benefits exceed costs by a factor of 3 to 1. The numbers carry a clear message. We can choose to pay less now or pay more later. Our tax dollars can support poor families while their children are growing and developing, or we can pay for their lack of education, obesity, alcohol abuse, and crime down the road in our healthcare and criminal justice systems. The statistics speak for themselves.
That was Jane Costello of Duke University. You can find
Pretty compelling.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, what's compelling about it to me is it's a more holistic, like longitudinal study of a bunch of different metrics of child educational outcomes and well-being. You know, it's not so like measuring the ounces of brain matter or whatever. It's
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can't believe those people had to wear electrodes for this whole time, 30 years.
Yeah, imagine like the thing that I think of is so by age 26, she said basically the ROI was 3 to 1. And so can you imagine that basically part of that was to look at brain waves for like the first few years. And so let's say they found nothing. And then those kids are 26 years old and they've measured that there's an ROI of 3 to 1 thanks to greater health and, less crime, further education, like all this stuff. So it's entirely possible that you could see the same thing from this experiment if it continued too. Like, they're not getting this money for like, forever. They're only getting it for like this short, amount of years. And then they'll just be measuring, did that short amount of years matter to these kids like as adolescents and stuff. Whereas the Smoky Mountain Study of Youth, that was looking at this income on the regular. It's actually permanent for like even all this time later, they're still getting money. And what I thought interesting too is they looked at $4,000 per year was that what that amount was back then. It's grown over time, but $4,000 per year is $333 per month. Like it's the same amount of money,
but
and
in the
yet
70s,
clearly,
per
strong
person.
impacts.
Yeah, I want to call out Daniel B's blowing up the chat. I think he's excited to be in here and he hasn't been in a while. But one thing he said was, "You look better today, Scott. I hope you guys are fine." And you do look good, Scott. Did you get a little sun or something?
It's always weird when I get like comments on my looks and stuff on this, especially I'm a writer at heart. I have no interest in like doing video stuff, but I'm doing it. So yeah, it's just weird. But thank you. All right. So another thing I thought would be fun was so I read a meta-analysis recently, looked at 13 different experiments, UBI experiments, and it found that like the biggest impact was on kids. So I just want to find that.
Well, while you're looking, I'll just confirm from my perspective, like having run a thing and being like sort of intimately embedded with people, like our docuseries wasn't just about measuring certain little bits of income. It was about like taking in a person's whole story over the course of years. And so like the findings sort of gradually sort of dawned on us as they were going. And the thing that kept like as time went by, the thing that has become the most powerful impact to me is the impact on kids. Like we have any one of the like four kids in the, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 kids in the experiment. I would justify the entire cost of like the $500,000 we raised to run the basic income program for 20 people, including these 5 kids. Like just the outcome on one of those kids was worth that whole $500,000. Like a kid that gets adopted that wouldn't have been otherwise and raised in a loving home. Like a kid that develops through medical conditions because much better than most kids in that situation because his parents were able to be there with him and and not have to like leave them alone in the hospital. Like the impact on kids is so profound because they're not only is it formative years, but also that impact has their entire lifespan to sort of pay off in terms of um, I guess ROI. So yeah, for me, kids is that's one of the reasons I'm a little bit triggered by this article so callously dismissing without looking at other stuff, because that was one of my big takeaways, hard earned over like 7 years of this, was if for nothing else, we do this for the kids.
Yeah. Okay, so here's the paper and here's the conclusion of the paper. So I'll just read the conclusion first, and then we'll go on from there. But so this also like describes this paper too in the conclusion. So here, this paper has surveyed 13 prominent UBI experiments and presented an analysis of the results to consider if UBI is a feasible alternative to traditional systems of Social Security reform. Across the 9 categories: employment, education, health, food security, finance and consumption, relationships in the community, female empowerment, housing and accommodation, and life satisfaction, many positive implications were observed, as per several null and negative results. However, the vast majority of observed results were favorable. Evidence from the trials shows that UBI successfully satisfies the aims of improving financial security and overall well-being in both developed and developing economies. Many of the findings were positive, with the most notable results occurring across the financial security, health, and education dimensions. Children were amongst the strongest beneficiaries of the trials and observed a 4.5% reduction in obesity, a 19.5% increase in their normal weight for age, a 30% increase in female secondary school attendance, and an increase in the educational attainment of 1 year in response to the cash transfers. So I decided to feed this paper into Notebook LM and have the 2 AI podcasters like talk about this, about the findings focused only on the findings on kids. And so here's that to like get across all the points that they found on kids.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into a topic getting a lot of buzz: universal basic income, or UBI. We've got this really compelling new meta-analysis. It pulls together findings from, I think, 13 UBI experiments around the world. Our goal here is simple: figure out the key takeaways, especially what all this means for kids and, ultimately for you.
Exactly. And just so we're all starting on the same page, UDI, according to the Basic Income Earth Network definition, essentially is regular cash payment. It's given to everyone individually, no strings attached, so no means test, no work requirement. Now, UBI conversations go in a million directions, but today, we're really zeroing in on one thing: the impact on children. This new survey gives us a great lens for that.
Okay, right. Let's get into it then, because the big headline from this analysis seems to be, wow, kids often came out as the biggest winners across these trials. That kind of pushes back on some narratives, doesn't it? So what specifically stood out for you regarding, say, direct health impacts?
It's pretty fascinating, actually, how that direct financial help translates so clearly into health improvements for kids. Look at the Alaska Permanent Fund dividend. That extra cash, maybe $1,000 or so per person, which, for many families was a decent chunk, maybe 10% of their income, that actually led to higher birth weights, about 17.7 grams more on average.
Okay, 17 grams. That sounds maybe small.
Well, yes and no.
Yeah.
It also meant a 0.7% decrease in the likelihood of low birth weight.
Yeah.
And in those very early stages of development, every single gram can make a difference for long-term health, cognitive outcomes. Yeah, it matters. And that wasn't all. Same dividend. A significant drop, 4.5% in childhood obesity. Statistically significant.
Huh. Okay. So Alaska's one example. Did this pattern show up elsewhere?
It did. We saw similar things pop up in the Indian UBI pilots. There they found about a 19.5% increase in kids having a normal weight for age. And for girls in one specific trial location, it was even higher, like a 25.3% jump. Really noticeable. And then there's Namibia. The big trial there saw child malnutrition just plummet. It went from, I think, 42% down to only 10%.
In how long?
Get this.
Yeah.
12 months, just 1 year. Oh, and one more, maybe less expected. The Cherokee Casino Dividend Study. Kids and families getting that dividend were actually significantly less likely to develop issues with cannabis or alcohol later. It hints at maybe a greater sense of stability having long-term effects.
Right. That stability point is interesting. So the health picture is pretty compelling, but UBI is often talked about in terms of opportunity, education. What about that side? Any aha moments there from the studies?
Oh, absolutely. The education findings are just as strong, really. And it seems to stem from, well, less stress at home and families being able to cover the basics. Take the Cherokee dividend again. They saw kids attending school more, getting better grades, higher test scores. And for the poorest families, getting an extra $4,000 a year was linked to kids achieving, on average, a full extra year of schooling.
A whole year. That's huge.
It is. And in India, the pilots showed this massive jump, 30% in girls attending secondary school. It went from like 36% up to 66% in the villages that got the payments.
So the money directly enabled that.
Yes, but it was more than just fees. It often meant girls weren't needed as much for, childcare or helping around the house.
Yeah.
They were freed up to actually go to school. And Namibia, similar story, school dropout rates fell from, I think it was around 40% down to almost zero. Part of that was families suddenly being able to afford school fees, yes, but also uniforms, books.
Things that are barriers when money's tight.
Exactly. Buying school supplies, making sure kids were going to school hungry so they could actually concentrate. And crucially, it often meant kids didn't have to work on the family farm or business. They could just be students.
It really sounds like this cascading effect, starting with the money but branching out. Did the studies look at the wider family picture? Relationships, that kind of thing.
They did. And that's where you really see the ripple effect. If we connect this to the bigger picture, several trials, including the Cherokee one again, and also the Stockton Seed trial in California, they found both kids and parents reporting more positive relationships. Parents felt they could engage more, maybe had more time or less stress.
So less financial pressure translates to a better home environment.
That seems so. Better financial security leads to better food security, less parental stress, which fosters that more stable, supportive home. And that in turn helps the kids do better, be healthier, focus more on school. It's all connected.
It's a powerful chain reaction, isn't it? So wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you listening to this?
Well, I think the big takeaway from the analysis itself is the call for more long-term research. We need more longitudinal studies to really grasp what they call the two-generational impact. How does supporting parents financially truly shape a child's entire developmental path? And what does that mean decades down the line?
Right. So the provocative thought for you is maybe to consider those long-term compounding effects. What could society look like if we directly invested in childhood well-being and stability in this way, right from the start? Something to think about. That's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Those are fun.
Good job, guys.
Yeah, boy. I mean, because we could just kind of like sit back and like eat snacks and stuff while that was going on. Very labor saving.
I got a lot done during that.
Yeah, and I really like how they ended with something that I think was a great takeaway to consider, which was this multi-generational stuff. Like that is something that even like the researchers from the Baby's First Years study are talking about as far as like, what we should look for. And it's that, if you have kids growing up, with more resources, less poverty, and then they have kids, what is that difference? And we're only going to be able to see something like this in that really long-term Smoky Mountain study. If you study with like those Cherokee dividends, because that's where they are right now, is like the amount is about $12,000 per year. At least it was a few years ago. I don't know what it is now. But imagine being able to study those people who are now like 30 years old. They're having kids. I'm sure some had it in their 20s. And so there's this growing group of kids. Maybe they're like, 0 to, 10 or something right now, whatever. And maybe that group, since not every one of them had kids, maybe that group is something like a few dozen or something. I don't know. But that particular cohort is like fascinating to me to consider, because those kids, like they're still being impacted. Their parents are still getting this money. And how different will those kids be from their parents with that whole family having received this across 2 generations? That to me, I would love to see where those kids are. And the impacts of that.
And what is their white brain matter? How many grams?
Right. If you were to measure it in the exact same way and it found nothing, then clearly there's no intergenerational impacts.
Like, what happens when you poke them?
Right.
There's a thing going on for me too in all this. Is like, I need to acknowledge how little I think us getting on here and talking about it makes a difference. It's more for like us and our few followers, right?
Yeah.
Like the whole like, we don't have the platform of the New York Times, right? This sort of thing is going to keep coming up. And when someone shares the New York Times and like I share like our little podcast or whatever, like maybe someday, but at this point, it's like, okay, so what do we do to combat these sort of narratives that are coming from these very large platforms that a lot of people trust and listen to? And so I want to mention a couple of the things that we're working on beyond the podcast and social media type stuff. So It's a Foundation is supporting a thing called UBI data, which the thing that excites me about that is it's this idea of having this broad meta-analysis and resource of all of the pilots that have gone down essentially. And like, so if there's 100 pilots in a database and 80 of them were measuring for child outcomes, we can look, what does it look like across and like those 80 different demographics and the whole thing sort of holistically. And basically the idea of having this be a place we could just point people to rather than our 2-hour podcast episode, to be like, why don't you look into it? Here's like a compendium of all the analysis on this issue right here. And then the other thing,
don't fall for cherry pick studies, and that's for pro or against. Like just because there's one study, don't believe only that one. Like look into the breadth of everything. And I'm excited how UBI data will be able to help with that.
Sort of the anti-cherry picking tool. It's like they like point at a thing and we flood it with like all of the information together at once. And then the other thing is commingle is, the data side of what could come out of commingle is not only massive amounts of data, both of the financial impacts and the personal, like if we do like impact surveys as well as track like financial health, but at a scalable level across all kinds of different demographics and geographies, and permanently. So one of the sorts of things we should absolutely be conscientious of trying to measure is outcomes for children, for example. And if we have outcomes for children starting from when we launch to 10 years later, and we have it in all of these different states across the US at these different levels of income basis for the families, and then that becomes a really hard to argue data point because it's so much broader.
Yeah, that'll be small. I have something covering, like I'm really interested in specifically setting aside studies that look at $200 per month, because that works out to $50 a week. And that's what we're looking to do with commingle as far as the size of the floor. So even though it sounds small, we already are seeing impacts from studies looking at that amount. And so, I'm very interested to see, what we see from that, especially like over longer periods of time. Before we move on from the kid stuff, I again want to point out this one we've talked about it multiple times before. But again, this looked at the ROI of a child allowance. And so here's what the abstract of this says.
That's return on investment for non-investor speak people. You pay $1, you reap the benefits of, like if you get 50 cents back, it's a negative return on investment. If you get $5 back, that's a 5-to-1 return on investment.
So they said, we conduct a benefit cost analysis of a U.S. child allowance based on a systematic literature review of the highest quality available causal evidence on the short and long-term effects of cash and near cash transfers. In contrast to the previous studies we synthesized, which tend to measure a subset of benefits and costs available, in a particular data set, we established a comprehensive accounting of potential effects and secure estimates of each. We produced core estimates of the benefits and costs per child and per adult of increasing household income by $1,000 in 1 year. Very small amount. It's even, the New York Times is talking about $4,000 a year. These can be applied to value any cash or near cash program that increases household income. Using microsimulation, we then apply these estimates to determine net aggregate benefits of 3 child allowance policies, including the expanded child tax credit as enacted for the year 2021 in the American Rescue Plan. Our estimates indicate that making that expansion permanent would cost $97 billion per year and generate social benefits with net present value of $982 billion per year. Sensitivity analyses indicate that our estimates are robust to alternative assumptions and that all 3 child allowance policies we evaluate produce very high net returns for the U.S. population. So again, we would spend $97 billion more per year and to provide what that policy was in 2021. It was $250 per month per kid, or $300 per month per kid, depending on age. Those under age 6 got the $300 per month. Savings of $982 billion. That's like $1 trillion saved per year. That's 10 to 1. So it's just, again, we know that these policies that reduce child poverty are extremely good investments. And if all we're looking at is what was the impact on white matter density in kids, you're entirely ignoring the fact that we could actually save $1 trillion a year by spending an extra $100 billion per year.
That's what I like. I get caught up in or frustrated by all of the different arguments going on in the tax space. There's the people who are like, all taxes are bad. And then there's the people who are like, taxes don't actually pay for things on a monetary theory. And I think there's like they're both sort of missing the point to me. It's like, we shouldn't see the money that goes toward these programs, whether we understand it as created by fiat currency or paid for by taxes, as like a cost. We should see it as an investment. And we should judge all of our programs and our spending, however you think the spending is coming from, we should see it as an investment and measure the ROI on that investment. And the ROI on the investment of a tax break for a billionaire is less than 1. So you get less money out of giving money to rich people. And the ROI on investment in poorer people is generally greater than 1 because it circulates and recirculates around the economy. And the ROI on programs for kids is 10 to 1. So it's obviously something we should do. And we should do enough of it until that stops being the case, right? Like at a certain point, the kids are fine, but we're not there yet because $1,000 is worth $10,000. So we should be doing it as much as we can.
Yeah, exactly.
You're making the assumption that people actually want to improve other people's
Right,
lives, which is maybe the core problem here.
It's
Yeah.
a generous assumption, but I like to give people that benefit of the doubt.
It's a nice thought. There are people out there.
Okay, so another piece of news recently, this is the results of what was called the $50 study. So again, we were just talking about commingled plans to do $50 per week. This was actually a $50 per week study. And this was focused on kids, but it was high schoolers. So again, it's like, you're looking at the New York Times article and they're talking about kids in their first few years. And, this is looking at high school kids and what impact that had. So as a summary of what this was, so from 2022 to 2024, Rooted School Foundation facilitated the $50 study, the only unconditional cash transfer program in the U.S. that focuses on high school students. Students enrolled in the $50 study received $50 per week, no strings attached, over 10 months. The program was designed as a randomized controlled trial and was evaluated by the University of Tennessee and University of Pennsylvania Center for Guaranteed Income Research. Phase 1 of the study was conducted from 2022 to 2023, and Phase 2 was from 2023 to 2024. And this is actually started in New Orleans, too. And so here are the key findings. The dual-year randomized controlled trial evaluation tracked over 380 students across 3 high schools. And that was Rooted School New Orleans, Rooted School Indianapolis, and George Washington Carver High School in New Orleans. Students in the treatment group received $50 per week for 40 weeks via a reloadable debit card. Most students in the control group received a $10 monthly Amazon card. Data was collected through academic records, transaction data from banks, in-depth interviews, and online qualitative surveys. The $50 study is the largest randomized controlled trial of unconditional cash transfers to high school students ever conducted in the U.S. Here are the key findings. It improved attendance. Students who received the cash transfers attended 1.23 more days of school in the semester following the intervention compared to students in the control group. Stronger financial capability. Treatment group students showed greater understanding of financial products and long-term planning compared to their peers in the control group. Financial discipline. Students demonstrated notable self-control and planning, ending the study period with an average of $300 remaining in their accounts. Meeting basic needs, about half of the funds students received, 45.8%, were spent on essentials like food, with additional funds going toward educational expenses and savings. And greater agency. Students reported increased feelings of control over their finances and confidence in making long-term decisions. Students reported spending their cash transfers on activities that were aligned to their future goals, such as dual enrollment coursework, ACT preparation classes, and getting a driver's license. It did not show an impact on a significant impact on grades. I think that's one of those things where there could be a potentially small but measurable impact with like a large enough sample size, and I think the impact would be larger over time. Yeah, this is another successful pilot, and it was a small amount, just $50 per week. for kids in high school.
Yeah, I love this study. This is great. This is like, it makes me think, I've got a teenager at home, and like just watching her like get her own little like starter bank account, and just like what she suddenly became extremely interested in the financial world and her own financial well-being, just because she had some money to play with, right? Like just having that in the bank to like, this is mine, oh, I can do something with it, is like all of a sudden like you're just awake and feeling like she's part of the world. And like, I love that.
I think people in general, but especially kids, they like step up to the expectations you put on them. So if you give someone responsibility, they become responsible in general.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point of allowance for a lot of people. It's not just to like confer privilege and comfort on their kids. It's to teach them about money. And that's part of what's so disgusting about like it's in the culture, and like those people just need financial literacy classes and stuff like that. Like what I saw in our experiment is that people who were like having a hard time even acknowledging their finances and their shortfalls because it was so daunting and so overwhelming in general, once the basic income started coming in and they had that reliable floor, then they started taking a very strong interest in their finances. I didn't have to say, if you take these classes, you'll get this money. It was like, as soon as the money was coming in, they're like pulling out spreadsheets and they're like signing up for apps. Like everyone's interested in knowing how to use their money. And to me, it's a little bit like for education for kids. Kids don't have financial literacy. We need to teach it more in school. But it's not just like reading words off a page or hearing about how to invest that teaches you how to invest. It's actual practice with money.
Yeah.
And that's one of
I
the
would
things
add it's
about
mistakes.
Right. So that's also the difference for me in terms of frequency. Like some people are like, here's an annual amount, right? You can blow it once a year on a sale or something, but then if you need it later, you don't have it, right? Here's a monthly amount, here's a weekly amount. We chose weekly, one in part to know that like you're always within 7 days of like some more help if something new happens, something goes wrong or whatever. But also that's 52 opportunities a year to try and fail and learn, right? It's like an allowance for people at any age to just get better at whatever you're trying to do with that reliable floor to fall on.
But yeah, if you have zero money to play with, you're not going to be like, well, how can I invest my zero into something? How can I like stretch by zero further out? Like you're left with despair. Like you're like, I can't do this.
You don't.
What gets me is it's the learning part. Those people who say you can't trust people and that they need financial literacy classes and all that stuff. And it's like you were treating people like kids, and maybe they are kids, but you're treating people like kids. And in order for us to learn anything, we've got to like actually make mistakes. So you get some money and you will make some mistakes. Different people's mistakes will vary according to the person. Like one person's mistake will not be someone else's mistake. That'll be what they had worked out well for them, and vice versa. And so everyone needs to learn for themselves what works and what doesn't. And you can't just like give them a textbook and say, here you go, learn what works and doesn't work. Like you get the money and then you spend it and you learn for yourself what is a mistake and what isn't. And that's how it works. That's the only way of learning, is to make mistakes. And we don't let people make mistakes, like
learning is so much more powerful experientially. There's learning from the book. There's learning, like some people are visual, some people are whatever, but everyone is a better learner when it's experiential. Like reading a recipe versus like making dinner with your mom or something like that is a very different experience. And like when it comes to these financial literacy classes that, we want to make sure the poor people know what to do with the money. Like having someone who has no money, right? So now this is all just in theory, doesn't even have a bank account, sitting hungry in the middle of class thinking, man, I hope this ends soon because I have to get back in line for the shelter by 4 p.m. or I sleep on the street tonight. Like that's not going to sink in very well. Like, but I'm going to remember this thing about compound interest for like 5 years from now when somehow I have money. Like
what you should do is if someone has a sign that's asking for money for food, you give them a pamphlet that describes why they should invest in index funds. Like that is
it's a safe bet.
Like, you need to learn how to handle your finances. What are you doing not investing in index funds? Come on.
I mean, how many Bitcoin do you even have? Like,
right.
Were you even following the trends at the time?
Yeah. And Bitcoin will solve everything. You got to make sure that Bitcoin is something that the homeless people out there can get, because like that will solve the problem. Just get some Bitcoin, hold on to it for 30 years and you will be rich. Like you just got to wait it out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just like part of it is people live in entirely different universes in bubbles, and you really have to get out there yourself to see how different life is for different people. And that's, I mean, we have a docuseries that's like, often we describe it as a docuseries about basic income, but really I'm leaning into more and more just telling people this is a docuseries about people and what it's like to live in America. And
And trust.
the lens that we're looking at it through is through this sort of conceit of like, what if there was a basic income? But it's not really about basic income. It's about understanding people and what life is like for people who aren't you. Because people, like, we have these ideas intellectually about all these broad swaths of thems and theys, and we don't know what the fuck we're talking about, right? So I want people to gain that knowledge experientially so they know what the fuck they're talking about. So they understand, like, oh, this is what it's like for a social worker to actually deal with these programs. This is what it's like for this person in this area to actually try to get their resources. And they're not like whatever I'm assuming about them. Like, I can understand what they're going through because I've kind of lived through it with them.
I wanted to uplift this comment from Robert asking about $500 monthly UBI versus full poverty UBI. Where does it make sense to start at, scale up, and all that stuff? I think it's a good question. I think that, if we're talking like realistic kind of thing, clearly like a smaller amount is going to be more realistic. So, I'm all for starting with $5 per month. Like, great. If there's if we can get that, but we can't get, a poverty level UBI, then let's do that. And we've talked about this before, but there's a study was done looking at $500 per month UBI, and that's per adult and kid. And we could do that with just a flat 7% surtax on income. Like, that would be the cost, which is also, it just happens to align with Commingle's mechanism, which is 7% fee on a weekly basis. And that's providing a $50 per week UBI floor. But with this, it would be $500 per month for everybody. And that's 7%. So 7% is not a big deal. Like, that is not a large increase in a marginal tax rate. And again, the $500 per month functions as a tax rebate. Most people are going to be spending a much smaller effective tax increase than 7%. And actually, most people would be seeing a negative tax rate.
Yeah.
They'd be getting more in UBI than they would be spending in additional taxes.
It's like 2/3 or more of people generally come out ahead under a UBI proposal, even one that's like as basic. And so it's not as progressive as like taxing the wealthy or whatever. It's still, if it's an income tax, you get 2/3 of people come out ahead.
I don't remember. Did you have a $500 per month plan in the UBI calculator? Is that one of the amounts?
I don't remember. We did
one.
I did put commingle in there as if everyone joined, and it was along those lines. Like, I've done versions where it was just funded by an income tax, like a flat income tax, which in a vacuum is regressive. But if it's funding a basic income, becomes progressive because of the way the nets balance out. So to answer Robert, from my perspective, there's a lot of ways to get there. And it's like a lot about where the political will is. Like, maybe we jump to a healthy basic income that's like full poverty line right away. Maybe we start small, like $100 a month through a carbon tax and dividend. To me is a very, very viable path and would be very impactful and would create the infrastructure and the excuse to put more money into it eventually. The thing that I differ with a lot of people in the basic income movement with is the most important thing to me is that it starts out universal.
Yeah.
Even if it's small, right? I don't care if it's government or private or whatever. It's really important to us to make commingle essentially a universal program. And the inclination from a lot of people is like, well, let's start with the people who need it most, which is just going back to this paternalistic sort of bureaucratic
we've always had that
inclination. It's the same thing as TANF and food stamps and all of that. It's like, let's make sure you need it first. And then we get bogged down in the same crap. It's not going to work the way it has the potential to work until we envision it and carry it out as a fully universal program and then grow from there. So the U is for universal is way more important than the amount.
Yeah, there's two big changes that we have to look at, and UBI does them simultaneously, but you can do them separately, which is that you can get rid of work requirements for any program. So, like, stuff like Medicaid, we're doing the opposite of that. We just applied more work requirements. But an improvement towards UBI is getting rid of work requirements, and another one is universality. Like, anything with a phase out, anything with a phase in, get rid of those things, do universal, and get through the tax code, achieve that clawback through like higher taxes on those with higher incomes. Like that is the way to approach universal basic income. And it's through both of those things, both unconditional and universal, of any amount. That's UBI. And that's what I most want to see. Again, any amount would be great.
Yeah. And that's kind of where we're coming at with commingle, is just as much as possible, as frequent as possible, and see where we can get it. So like, in terms of like, I don't think there's one particular like cadence or amount that is better than another. It's the maximum, whatever that may be. Even if it's different every 10 minutes, like initially I was like, maybe we could constantly be feeding money into people's bank accounts. Maybe it could be like happening every second. And it's actually possible. Like you can't, like, the only thing that slows it down is transfer times. But if you're really just monitoring accounts and moving numbers, like those numbers can move very, very fast. And
I like that.
Nothing wrong with keeping track of that from a second by second basis.
I like to envision also like something that would really piss off the anti-UBI people out there, but like just sitting at the bar, you have no money, but you're sitting at the bar and you're like watching your app and the pennies are ticking up and you're like,
I could buy another beer.
One beer.
Now I can buy a beer. Right. I mean, why not? It's a good thought experiment at the very least.
That'd be fun.
Right.
But there's another part. I don't know if we want to move on yet, but the second part of Robert's question is that's the part that I have a harder time with, is the decentralized or national version. And I think my thinking on that is also like as many people as possible, right? Like if that many people is a group of 50 kids in a high school, or if that group is as the entire country or the whole world, like it doesn't matter. Like the scale is there are things that change as you scale up and down. But if that is the policy, as many people as possible, as much money as possible, as often as possible, you really can't go wrong.
Well, and my approach to as many people as possible too is where I often differ with people, where it's like, let's try to raise more money and pick more people. And it's like, for me, it's like, let's build the infrastructure that has the theoretical potential to scale universally. And then if we have to, which is what we're going to have to do for commingle, like we want to launch a pilot and we're trying to raise a budget for up to 10,000 people, right? And then how do we pick those 10,000 people? That's a question. Is it geographically located? Is it just like a cap on how many people across the nation? But basically we define a universe and make it universal within that universe. We have to put borders on it somewhere until we know we have the bandwidth to grow to a larger universe, right? But anyone within that universe can join, and there's not like extra conditions and targeting. And until we can grow to the point where we can say, are you in this nation? You're welcome to join. And then someday the North Star is like, are you a living, breathing human being? Here's something you can connect with and get some support and give some support.
Yeah, so the next thing I wanted to cover, we're talking about amounts here. I think it's pretty funny that $600 tariff rebate checks have been proposed by Josh Hawley. So here's
Remind me who Josh Hawley is. Is he on the left or the right? And like, what's his thing? Do I hate
He's
him
on
or
the
do I
right.
love him?
He's the one who on January 6th, he did the fist on the way in, and then he was caught like sprinting out when all the shit went down. That's Josh Hawley.
So this is like another validation that there's fertile ground on the right wing for an idea like basic income, because that's essentially what he's proposing.
Yeah. Okay, so here's some clip about that.
Connor, thank you. We have continuing coverage now at 6:45 of tariffs. There is an idea that's being floated around now the nation's capital. Rebate checks from the money coming in from those tariffs.
Our Scripps News Group's Joe St. George has what the idea could mean for you and your wallet.
Well, remember those stimulus checks from a few years back, the federal government depositing a few $100 in your bank account during COVID-19? Well, a similar idea has been introduced in Congress, not because of a global health emergency, but because of the record amount of revenue being brought in through tariffs. Republican Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri has officially introduced this piece of legislation entitled American Worker Rebate Act of 2025. It's based on the belief that the federal government is bringing in a record amount of tariff revenue, and as a result, the American people deserve a cut. In June, for instance, the federal government reported a new tariff revenue record of over $26 billion. That is quadruple the amount from the same month last year. Even more tariff revenue appears to be on the way. President Donald Trump announcing new tariff rates for European countries in recent days.
I think it's great that we made a deal today instead of playing games.
Here is how the proposed tariff rebate plan could possibly work. According to Senator Hawley's legislation, $600 per adult and child would be deposited by the Treasury Department into Americans' bank accounts. Individuals making under $75,000 a year and couples who file their taxes jointly and make under $150,000 would qualify. Those earning more would receive a reduced payout. The amount could even increase depending on if tariff revenue booms even more. The legislation is still in its introductory phase, however, with the House of Representatives already leaving Washington until early September, so no formal action is expected soon. Of course, the government doesn't have to give the newfound money to Americans. Some fiscal conservatives have suggested the money could help pay down the nation's debt or even help pay for President Trump's one big, beautiful bill. President Trump himself has already talked about this idea of a possible rebate check back to Americans. Of course, many economists say that tariffs are a form of a tax and that inflation will tick up in the coming months because of all of these new tariff rates. Inflation was a bit higher in June compared to May, although still under 3%. Joe St. George, Scripps News Group.
So yeah,
I don't have high hopes for that going through. Just to start off, that I don't think that's ever going to happen. But it's not. It's like another one of these ideas that may have somebody may have accidentally stumbled into a good idea. Like if you bumble around enough through the financial policies, you might end up hitting a good one. Right?
Well, and it's
That's what
also
it
one of
feels like.
those ideas where it's like the response from people who aren't necessarily Republican shouldn't be like, boo, this guy said it. It should be like, well, yes, and like, yeah, you're onto something here. Like, let's actually talk about this.
Right.
Like how to me it says that this is popular, and it's popular with conservatives. The stimulus checks were very popular. This is essentially a fourth stimulus check, $600 for everybody, except for it phases out at $75,000 per single, $150,000 per household. Like that's essentially, it's a duplicate of the second stimulus check as far as design and distribution. And also so that it goes to everybody at the bottom, so it's not phased in. It's not some kind of work requirement like we've seen with the rest of stuff that they've been doing. It's legitimately another stimulus check as far as going to how many people it would go to.
And isn't it the phase out too, the cutoff's at 75,000 per person.
It's a 5% phase out.
It's a slow phase out, so it still trickles. It gets to a lot of people above that line too. I mean, the better way to do it would be to just give it to everybody and raise a little extra taxes. It's just hard to get people to propose that or support it. The word tax is such a bad word in this country.
Yeah,
anytime it's a rebate, it's always that sounds like we should have that.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
There's
it's not a handout, it's a rebate.
Right. A prebate, or there's someone someone in the chat earlier, I couldn't tell if it was a dig or a quote or whatever, but saying there's no such thing as a free lunch, which is one of those things that you hear pop up all the time. And my response is yeah, let's pay for lunch, I'm happy to pay for lunch. What are we talking about? And between us all, we can afford lunch for everybody, and people can pay an amount that's more appropriate for them. Taxes, I'm fine with taxes. I agree that I don't want them to be spent badly or in ways that I don't know where it's going. But I can envision a world in which I'm very happy about paying the taxes because I like what they're doing. It's my way of expressing and giving back to my fellow Americans. That's what I want my taxes to be.
I mean, if it's coming from tariff money, it's kind of zeroing itself out. The tariffs are probably going to increase prices by enough that you're going to need to have an extra $600 to buy stuff and just live. Who knows?
Yeah.
It's a good way to curtail that possibilities.
So does that make tariffs less of a bad idea in that moment? Does that
kind of,
then
like that
make
is the main
American
problem
business
with
more competitive without hurting American consumers?
it's doing a weird thing with inflation and stuff, but it's not like if there is this like kind of safety net for those that it's going to impact the most, like you are kind of like making the tariffs less dangerous in a way.
Yeah, like I would rank these as in, first of all, I don't want the tariffs, so don't do the tariffs and do UBI. That's what I prefer. Below that is if you're going to do tariffs, then do UBI.
Right.
Like you want to make sure.
And call it a rebate. Do whatever you want.
Like do whatever you want to call it. But just make sure that you do that, because otherwise, it's highly regressive to do tariffs. Like that is a sales tax. A sales tax is regressive. The only way to compensate, to balance out, to reduce that negative impact and even make it progressive is to do that cashback component. The same thing with the carbon tax. Like don't just do a carbon tax and then do nothing with it, but like reduce the national debt.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
That's what I was about to say.
Make sure there's a dividend component involved.
And I wouldn't want to like conflate carbon tax with tariffs, but like anything that gets passed, like it's important to acknowledge that a carbon tax would get passed on to the consumer, and you don't want to try to like fight climate breakdown on the backs of poor people, poor consumers who can't afford it, right? And I always talk about the yellow vest protests in France as a response to a carbon tax they passed there, where it's like, hey, look, we're gonna do this carbon tax and we're gonna put all this money towards these programs over here, and all of the people who already were struggling to afford life all of a sudden saw that extra, basically price at the pump and whatever, and so it's like, so you're just gonna hurt us for your program. Like the carbon tax with a dividend is a very elegant way to make sure that the people who are in the end paying for the programs and paying for the change are the ones who are the higher consumers and the ones who are the most able to.
Yep. All right, so the next thing I wanted to cover, and this is proposed legislation, and this is in Pennsylvania. And so this was Representative Ben Waxman in Pennsylvania proposed the Climate Emergency Basic Income Act. And so here's just a description of that. So here are the key provisions of the bill. Eligible individuals would receive $1,000 per month for up to 6 months following a state-declared disaster. There would be an additional $500 per month provided per dependent. And individuals must have experienced either catastrophic property loss, including the loss of tents, vehicles, documents, or essential belongings, or a serious injury resulting from the disaster. Residents of designated encampments, shelters, mobile home parks, or apartment buildings declared uninhabitable would qualify automatically through group-based eligibility. And the program would be jointly administered by the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency and the Department of Labor and Industry, leveraging both emergency management infrastructure and direct payment capacity. This legislation recognizes the realities of disaster survivors and does not require proof of homeownership, formal residency, or government-issued ID. It is designed to meet people where they are with immediate, unconditional support. The Climate Emergency Basic Income Act is a practical, compassionate response to the climate crisis and a step toward building the resilient Pennsylvania we need. That's according to Representative Ben Waxman, House District 182 in Pennsylvania. So what I like about this is essentially like a legislative version of what Dolly Parton did with the wildfires in her neck of the woods, and also what was done by Oprah and The Rock in Hawaii after the Maui fire. Very interesting.
Yeah. The main thing the question that raises for me in general is like when they say, eligible residents, is like, what is the process for deciding who's eligible? Like who falls through those cracks, So it seems like it is a good step in the right direction in terms of unconditional cash, but that lack of the universal element will mean a limit to like the
it's not clear like it's going to require a disaster to occur. Is that right?
Yeah, it requires a climate disaster,
related
a disaster that can be related to the climate. So
So
There's going to be
so that
arguments
would
there.
kick in the amount that now goes out to everybody that is, yeah, you'd have to like geographically define the area, I guess, like where, like what,
Sure, just like you always would.
how far did the earthquake reach? I guess so. So yeah, I mean,
Would
Yeah.
it
so
be everyone in
yeah,
that geography would get it? Is that the way it's set up?
It sounds like anyone impacted, so you're impacted pretty much. If you see like a loss of income from your job, you're impacted. So, pretty much everyone in some area is going to be impacted in that way. I think it's smart as far as like looking at, let's just go like as universal or as unconditional as possible within certain areas after disaster. Like we've already talked about utilizing commingle for the same kind of thing. Like we're going to have to determine what is that area, what are the zip codes or area codes or whatever. Like there always has to be some kind of line drawn, but it's great to me to see this approach. Like it's just saying $1,000 per month per adult, $500 per month per kid for 6 months following a disaster. We know that worked great when Dolly Parton did it. And I haven't seen like a study from the Maui response yet. Hopefully there will be a paper at some point. I don't know. But we do know that it works, and it works better. And we know that we're existing in this weird time where potentially FEMA may even be just deleted, and Trump is already talking about having states do their own thing in response to disasters. So this is getting out in front of that, saying, look, if FEMA is not going to be a thing, or even if it is, let's make sure that we respond to disasters in our state in a way that we know is like most effective and helpful to people, making sure that they have cash and security for 6 months to rebuild after some big impact.
And it's interesting too. It's one of like the sort of bonus features, I guess, is to be able to use it in sort of a disaster aid sort of a situation where it's like, instead of building up an infrastructure that's meant to last permanently, like you could also use it in theory to get a lot of money to people in an area in a more universalist mechanism very quickly, and also proportionally directed to the people who need it the most in that way. It's very similar to like the disaster aid sort of version of commingle that we imagine too. So it'll be cool to see, do they pass it? Does it work? Or maybe we can help like them make the case for themselves, to do it that way.
So the next thing I wanted to cover was it's a fun thing. So this would be a little bit of a fun discussion too. And this is something that Derek Guy shared. This is like a TikTok video. And it had like a good discussion on Blue Sky with a lot of people talking about UBI in response to this video. So here's that video, and you'll clearly immediately see why so many people were talking about basic income, even though it doesn't say anything about it.
This comment is so funny to me because my husband doesn't just have scything as a special interest. He has a lot of other special interests too. I'm just going to quickly show you some of them. He got really into quilting before our son was born. All of this fabric was hand dyed by him. The stars are embroidered, and he sewed around them to make this pattern. Look at the details on the moon. That's not it, okay. This is one of his oil paintings. And another one, and another one. And he got really into watches. So not only did he build this pocket watch, but he also enameled the watch face. This is glass enameled. We literally have a kiln in our house now because of this. This is a book of his photography that he printed himself and hand sewed the binding on. These are all photos that he took while working as a merchant marine on a container ship. I'm happy to talk about more of these things in detail. He's gotten into other stuff too, but if you're interested, just let me know in the comments.
Yeah, I see that and I immediately think, oh, just imagine what people would do with basic income and how much more cool stuff would be made.
What would
just
that
people
guy
being
do?
free to do that. Yeah, we need basic income just so he can do more cool stuff.
Just completely unleash Joe, or whatever his name is.
Yeah, when people say, oh, people will get lazy in response, and come on, that's basically what we see there is, we saw a lot of that during the pandemic when people got the stimulus checks and they were at home with nothing to do because they were shut out of their jobs for however long. People did all sorts of cool things, and we would just see so much more of that.
But will they make more money? Will they be adding to the economy? Will they be contributors to society? This is the question.
Yeah.
I mean, he could probably sell one of those artworks. I have in my eye on that quilt.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden there's some GDP.
But I think like that kind of gets at the very gist of like what's our issue here, and is that like we don't think in those terms as people. Like we think in at the very human level, where like what can we do today? Like how can we kind of make our lives interesting right now? Like what little activity can we do that's going to be like, match my mood? Like even if it's lying around in bed reading a book, right? Like that's how we think as people. We're not thinking about like, sometimes we have to, but naturally we don't think, how can I convert this activity into dollars, right? Like that is a very specific type of thinking that you go into, but it's kind of unnatural. Like it isn't necessarily like how we are hardwired.
But it
You
is
know what I mean?
endemic as well. Like that natural type of thinking that you're describing is what I would hope to see.
Right. You're
UBI
always going
world.
to be like, how do I go out and make sure my family has food? Like nobody's going to not do that, right? Unless you're like got some serious problems.
So that like, what do I want to give right now? What is my mood? Like that kind of thinking
Yeah.
is sort of the purview of the privileged right now. And I would love
Mhm.
everyone to have that level of privilege
Right.
to be
Yes.
able to say like, how do I want to give to the world today? What do I need? What do I want to do? What am I interested in? Rather than how the fuck do I feed my kids?
Yeah.
Like if that's the only thing we're thinking about, then we're completely hamstringing human civilization, like
Mhm.
from its greater potential.
Yeah, I mean, David Graeber talked about this in his like book, like Debt the First 5,000 Years, and this is like pre-money thinking where it was just normal for people to do stuff for each other, and so you would do something for someone, and then they would feel indebted to you and would at some point like do something for you, and like we all just kind of like kept track in regards to like who do we owe something to in regards to they did something for us first, but it was always them doing it first. Like that was like this origin, and now we're in this cash society where like you don't do something for someone until they give you money, which is basically proving that they've already done something for someone else, and it's just like this different system. And if we can get back to that, like this is what I think where you can reintroduce a kind of gift economy where if you make it so that people can do stuff, then they're actually able to give it away for free. So like the guy who made that, like the quilt or whatever, I don't see him selling that, but I do see him like giving that to like maybe a relative or like a good close friend of the family or something. And that's the kind of stuff I expect more of where you do stuff and you don't necessarily want to sell it. You just want someone else to have it. And then they want someone else to have something. They will create something and give it away.
Right. And
like, that's what really excites me.
And the sense of obligation and the debt is real. Like that was why early in the pandemic we had like fled upstate and we were living with my in-laws. After a couple of weeks, we had to be like to my mother-in-law, stop making us dinner. Like this is too many. You've made us too many dinners. Like let us just scrounge at our own level of baseline existence so that we don't owe you for all these dinners. It's like this assumption that like if people get something in the form of a gift or in the form of like unconditional, like, well, that's perfect because people are hardwired to just want to, collect things without any effort and just enjoy comfort. It's like that is not how people are hardwired. People are hardwired as social creatures that want to be part of a give and take with other people, and they want to step up and contribute to the world.
But also not all of them. Like there are plenty of people that don't want to, and they also should be treated as humans, right? They should also deserve the same kind of like freedom to not have to engage with people if they really don't want to.
But I also think a lot of that like withdrawal and not wanting to engage isn't their like many of their
I
root
do agree
natures.
that a lot of the withdrawal is like, I want to withdraw from this crazy rat race where I'm valued by like how I can convert my time into money, right? Like that's just something that is sort of a natural thing to want to withdraw from in a way.
So the next thing I want to go from what we're just talking about to Bernie Sanders' guest appearance, talking to Joe Rogan, because basic income got mentioned multiple times. And the theme generally was like basically what happens, when everyone's like unemployed from AI, and like what are the deeper questions about like meaning that come from that. So here's that.
So automation comes, and one of the things that Andrew Yang warned us about a long time ago, and back then I kind of saw it in the distance. I was like, yeah, he's got a real good point about universal basic income. But the speed in which it's happening, I didn't anticipate. And when it, we live in Austin, and when you go around Austin, you see these Waymos everywhere. So
all right, I'm gonna plead ignorance. Tell me what a Waymo is.
Waymo is a driverless automobile.
Okay.
So you use an app, you call a Waymo.
I know.
A lot of people like it because you don't get a shifty Uber drivers trying to sell you fentanyl or whatever. I'm not saying that they do that. Uber, don't sue me. But they're very good. They don't get in accidents. They follow the speed limit. They're good about merging. They're good about pedestrians. They have cameras all around them spinning.
I know, I've seen them. Yeah.
They're very effective.
Yeah.
And what was really fascinating was during these ICE riots, they were lighting those things on fire. And I was like, I disagree with that, but I also think it's directionally correct. I mean, that's your enemy. Your enemy is automation, the enemy of the human being, a human that lives in this functional society and everybody has a task and get paid for the task. Automation's going to take all that away. So if you do say this, okay, we're going to lower your work week, what if there's no job left for the human being to do? If the entire assembly line, we talked about this about China and some of their coal factories. There was this video that I watched of this coal factory in China, which is entirely automated every step of the way. The trucks.
No human beings at all?
No human beings at all. I mean, there's probably a few overseers that make sure that all the systems are functioning correctly. So you have software engineers and, people that repair people. But the trucks even park themselves next to the charging station and recharge.
Wow.
And then they're moving 24 hours a day, unloading, documenting where everything is. It's all in computer databases. It's wild to watch because there's no people. It's all just 24 hours a day, machines. What do you do when there's no need for these people? And what happens, even with universal basic income, what we're talking about, I support it. I'm a big supporter of social safety nets. Look, when I was a kid, my family was on welfare, and we were on food stamps too. Like, if you don't have that, people go hungry. Like, if we're going to support the community, we want people to be able to survive and be able to work their way out of that. My family did work their way out of that. So it's cool for me as a child to see my parents struggling, but then succeed and get out of it. What worries me is that if all the jobs are gone and everything gets automated, even if people have universal basic income, they don't have meaning.
Good. All right, you're touching on really deep issues.
Right. This is the big one because a lot of people, you want to get your car fixed, you go to KC. He's the best. He knows how to fix your car. KC.
And work gives, as you've just said, this word purpose is an enormously
It's
important.
huge.
I don't care if you sweep the streets. People have purpose. They want to do their job well. Work is an important part of our lives.
Right.
Is it right?
Yes.
At the end of the day,
It's your identity a lot of times.
Right.
Yeah.
And you want to be a productive member of society.
Right.
I'm contributing.
Right.
All right.
Okay, just stop there from that.
Yeah, I was pretty pleased with Joe for how he kept pushing Bernie on the thing. And I love
Yeah.
Bernie, but Bernie keeps going to we should lower the work week to less hours. We should, make sure everyone has healthcare for all. And he just kept dancing around the whole income side of things and the AI question and all of that. And Joe didn't let it drop. I thought that was a great interview.
And then, so before we can talk about this part too. So this is another recent one, James Talarico, and again, basic income is discussed.
Let's just talk about. I think we're all either thrilled or terrified of this AI future, and who knows what it's going to look like. It's probably not going to be apocalypse, and probably not going to be utopia. It'll probably be something in the middle. But it is going to change how we understand work. It's going to change how we understand our jobs and our careers. It's going to eliminate a lot of jobs, I would imagine. And so this is now going to be a spiritual question about what does it mean to be a human being. It's one that we are not equipped to answer right now because in a lot of ways we have thrown out the baby with the bathwater. And because of the problems with organized religion that we talked about earlier, we've just jettisoned the whole thing. So we're no longer having conversations about what it means to be a human being. But to get to your question about what specifically this could look like, I'm intrigued by some of the pilot programs on universal basic income and what they've provided. But I think what's missing in this idea is how do you provide people the support to go off and actually and realize whatever dream has been festering in their brain for a long time, almost like entrepreneurial grants, right? Of where we invest in someone's next big idea for an industry, for art, whether it is community work or nonprofit work or solving a community problem. My point is, my life shows me that people are they have this creativity and this imagination that we are not tapping into. And it is, and so much of that is trapped in people who are either in these meaningless jobs or are not, or either gone to, inadequate schools and therefore don't even get into a job where they could express themselves and give this gift. But I do know that it's out there, and that if we tap into it, it could be a game changer. So I don't know what this looks like, but it does seem like the disruption that's coming could be an opportunity. Again, back to out of crucifixion comes resurrection. Disruption is an opportunity.
Yeah, I would agree.
To do something.
I think it's also very dependent upon the individual. And I think the best thing we can give them is inspiration. And oftentimes the best thing you can give them is an example of someone who also did it.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of people that feel completely disenfranchised by the system that's currently in place now that I think is going to be upended by AI. So there is an opportunity for them to do something completely different. And the positive aspect of universal basic income is that, first of all, I think we could both agree that if an enormous amount of jobs just go away, that probably is the only way to sustain society. You can't just have people go poor and go hungry when we have unfathomable wealth that's being created by these same systems, right? So universal basic income, on one hand, has a lot of hope because there is this potential that you now no longer. So we're locked into this situation where you think that you're working and you have to work because you have to take care of food and you have to take care of shelter. And that this is what most people are doing with most people in this country right now are working check to check. They're living paycheck to paycheck, and they're essentially getting by. And any catastrophe, medical or otherwise, will eliminate all savings instantaneously, and they're doomed. And so what they're doing is just working, giving most of their life just to sustain whatever state they're in currently. And that's very frustrating for people because they don't think they ever get ahead, and they don't think they have any potential to get ahead. So if something comes along that takes care of that aspect of life, so if universal basic income can provide you with food and shelter, now you no longer have to think about food, you no longer have to think about shelter. Now you have to find meaning. The problem is, for a lot of people, there are so many distractions that are unproductive, like social media, like video games, like many things that people participate in all day long. And then you add in a factor of drug addiction and partying and a lot of other fruitless things that people participate in. If you only were living for the first 35 years of your life just to deal with food and shelter, and now food and shelter is provided for you, now at 35, you have to sort of reformulate your view of the world and find meaning and find something. And maybe you're an atheist, so you don't find meaning in religion, and you don't have any desire to find meaning in religion. Okay, well, what do you do, and how do you educate these people, and how do you? I think there's going to be upheaval, the likes of which we've never.
Very tired to watch.
Yeah, so it ends there with saying, like, going to be a lot of chaos.
I mean, I think.
Yeah, it sounds like a really good discussion. It's really nice to hear that, like, he's kind of back on board in a way. Like, this is now the thing that's occupying his mind instead of like, vaccines. And
we should have him on the show. Do you think?
Yeah.
He's been trying to get on the show for ages. We should let him on
Who
the
is
show.
the other guy that he was talking to?
Yeah.
Who was the guy? He was
James Talarico.
What's his deal? I guess I don't recognize.
I mean, he is a representative in Texas And, he's really a Christian, and he's really blown up on like TikTok and stuff, like his videos. He's very, very popular there, talking a lot about like Christianity from like kind of a more of a, like as a Democrat instead of as a Republican.
Yeah. But hearing that, like I do kind of see that maybe like a lot of the kind of resistance to the concept of UBI is, I think it kind of when you start following it to its logical conclusions, you do end up at this place where you have to start asking yourself these questions about like, what am I doing here? Like they're hard questions. They are these sort of like spiritual questions that we're not really used to having to dive into. And I think maybe people just don't want to do that. And it's asking a lot. And so I think the more it can be like introduced as like, we're not asking you to be a different person. This UBI is not asking the world to change itself, right? Like it's just asking you to like kind of be the person that you are and maybe a better version, because you're not always worried about money.
Yeah, I think it goes to like Maslow's hierarchy is what I think about, like both listening to the Bernie Sanders discussion and listening to the discussion with James Talarico. I'm just sitting there thinking Maslow's hierarchy, and I'm also thinking of the previous clip we talked about where like the guy made the quilts and, the watch and like all the cool stuff, where I think that they're like Bernie Sanders, Joe Rogan, like they're looking at that guy making the cool stuff as being like kind of a 1 in a billion kind of odds of someone like wanting to do that kind of stuff with their time and resources. And I don't think that's correct. I think that if we make sure and lift everyone, above, up Maslow's hierarchy of needs with their basic, the foundation of the pyramid covered, they are more able to self-actualize, and reach that top. And maybe it's still difficult. You need education, and, you need to have like other things that can like help them climb the pyramid. But if you don't have the basic income part, then you are really looking at a horrible mess. Like we're already seeing the results of a lack of basic income with like extreme inequality. Right. Now you're introducing AI. That's going to get far worse. And, we talked about this last week as far as this breaking point that we're heading towards. And so you got to make sure that Maslow's hierarchy, the foundation, is covered before we reach that breaking point. And then once that's covered, then first of all, I think a lot of people are going to do cool stuff, and they're going to be unleashed in ways that, we're talking about like second Renaissance unleashed kind of stuff. And then for those who still have difficulties, you still have like education, you have like skills training, you have like other things to help. And, I think like Bernie Sanders, he's thinking, I would rather give someone a shovel to like dig up a hole and fill it back in again and feel proud about like the work they're doing. And I disagree with that component. I think that you shouldn't just give someone work just to keep them busy. I don't think that's where meaning comes from. Meaning comes from people like self-pursuing what they consider to be their meaning and their calling. I think we'll see more of that.
Glad they're having this discussion in these terms, though. Like one of the things that second guy said is it becomes a spiritual question. What does it mean to be a human being? And I think that is the crux of the matter.
Yeah.
I think Joe is right to say, like, what about someone who's lived the first half of their life under this paradigm of struggle, and then that goes away to a certain degree? Like, what is that transition period like? What is it like to refine our purpose and meaning, or just like our routine, right? I think these are all very valid questions. The one guy said it's missing in the idea. I think it's just underexpressed and underexplored in the idea. Is that okay? There's gonna be a rewriting of society and what it means to live in society, contribute in society, and at least at the very, like, all of them seem open to the idea that you don't want to face it with just unnecessary poverty and strife and struggling, like that sort of come to Jesus moment of like, well, who even are we anymore? You want to do it from a place of like, I'm at least 2 steps up Maslow's hierarchy to be able to think clearly about the issue. Like, how can you find the answer to purpose in an automated future if you're still trying to find the answer to where do I get my next meal?
Yeah, exactly. You have to take that part away.
Yeah. If you no longer have people telling you what your purpose is to fill in this hole with this shovel, then like, yeah, you're now into the next step of like really finding it for real, which is kind of what people should be doing in the world. Like, that's what we do.
I also think it's not just something that's needs to solve itself by itself with just a systems tweak. It's not just an engineering thing. People are motivated by stories and inspiration. I don't think Joe's wrong to talk about inspiration. I think of like JFK type inspirational, think not what your country can do for you, think what you can do for your country. In a paradigm where your country doesn't do shit for you, you'd be like, go fuck yourself, John. But like in a paradigm where it's like, here's this big investment we're all making in you and each other. So now think not what your country can do for you, think what you can do for your country can land. Like I would couple UBI, if I was like a politician, with I would couple UBI with a very strong dose of like, now get out there and make a difference. Like this isn't like, I wouldn't message it as this is a way to keep you from suffering, you poor people. Like this is a way to unleash you. So show us what you can do. Let's find the answer together.
And again, going back to that video of the guy doing cool stuff, like that's inspiring. That went viral because people watched it and they're like, that's so cool. And imagine, I'm sure there's some other people out there because of that video are also looking to do cool things and even like thinking of making TikTok videos about the cool things that they do. And like that's a source of inspiration. Like in this future where people have UBI and more free time to use that UBI to do cool things, then I imagine that there's going to be more content going viral about the cool things that people are doing. And that's going to inspire other people to do cool things, versus this world we live in now where so many people just have no time to do cool things or resources. And it's all about mostly like complaining and outrage bait and clickbait and all this other stuff. I think social media can be a source of inspiration instead of like the source of our downfall like it is right now.
There's elements of it that already are a source of inspiration. It's just like the wacky, bizarre, creative, and hilarious memes, like the different ways people put words together or like describe a moment. Like beyond like the connecting with people, like just the network effects of just aggregate creativity all coming together and like forming new languages. That is still inspiring to me. And, it's competing with like the cesspool effects of like, let's all scream at each other. And that definitely dampens it. But I mean, even things like sharing cute cat and dog videos, like I'm inspired by the fact that I get to see like amazing animals doing cute things and we can all appreciate it. Like that's absolutely legitimate to me as an inspiration.
Yeah. A lot of it just makes me think of, again, like the Monsters Inc. argument for basic income, where, if you have a society that's fueled on hope instead of fear, then there's just going to be a lot more stuff. So I get why you're seeing a lot of these conversations about where will you find meaning if there's like no jobs to do. And, I guess I want to do a caveat there too, is just saying, okay, yes, we will have a lot of automation, but we've covered this before where I don't think it's going to be, 100% of all jobs or even like 80% or something. Like maybe something 20%, 25, 30, 40, but like 80 to 100%. I just don't see that, especially if there's a basic income where people have the money to do stuff and people will still be exchanging that money for the stuff that they're doing. You're still going to see human jobs. There will be a premium, like you'll have people still want to go to a human restaurant made by human chefs instead of robot chefs, even though it's more expensive. Like we'll still see that. So I just don't see this future where there's just like no work at all to be done. So therefore you're wondering where people are going to find their meaning. There's still going to be stuff. And you can actually reduce the work week too, so that you can chop that available work up into stuff and more people can have those jobs. Like I think it's an extreme look to say what happens when there are no jobs. That's not realistic. The question is, if you have a basic income, which fuels jobs, and then you have a bunch of people with those jobs doing the things that they want, what's the additional stuff that you need to do to help people find purpose? But I just don't see this like mass purposelessness happening that some people fear.
Yeah, I think like a lot of the ways the discussion goes, like I love the way that this is going in the spiritual realm and like the purpose, because when we focus on jobs, bringing it back to focusing on, white brain matter in children, focusing on like all these different things are missing the forest for the trees, which is the very heart of the idea, is empowering people at scale. Like, do we want to transfer a certain amount of power to everyone to pursue whatever it is they want to do? And then the question behind that is, do we trust each other? Do we all have the capacity to, use that power to work together, to have that mutual debt, that obligation to each other and express it in a productive way altogether? And I don't think we can imagine Like, we've never seen a world like at the national scale. There's like indigenous communities and things you can point to, but that operates on this collaborative, massive, universal trust mechanism and support mechanism. So I don't think we can really speculate our way into like what's it going to look like, because I think it will surprise all of us.
Yeah. Let's end there. I think it's a nice, hopeful note about just how much we can be surprised by introducing a basic income and automating a bunch of work and kind of unleashing society. I think society will surprise us. It's about trust. I trust you. I especially trust all the listeners out there. Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe, share the video with others, and we will see you next time.